Hello, Internet. I am Pastor Recoil, and welcome to my parish. Today is the 9th Sunday after Pentecost, and we're going to talk about it. Welcome to Pastor Recoil's parish, where I talk about some things you may not have heard about in church, either because it's not quite appropriate for all audiences or it just isn't something that's easy to talk about in a sermon. The readings for the 9th Sunday after Pentecost are Genesis 29, 15 through 28, Psalm 105, 1 through 11 and 45b, Romans 8, 26 through 39, and Matthew 13, 31 to 33 and 44 through 52. We're going to talk today about a dude who apparently can't recognize the love of his life. We're going back to Genesis this week, and a few things have happened since the last time we were in Genesis and Isaac got himself a wife, Rebekah. They had two sons, Jacob and Esau. Esau was a bit of a himbo, and Jacob was a cheat and a liar. It made for an interesting combination. Jacob bought his brother's rights as firstborn son for a bowl of lentil stew, and then conspired with his mother to cheat Esau out of his patriarchal blessing before their father passed away. After that, because Esau was big, strong, and scary, Jacob fled town. And in a bit of timey-wimey confusion, because the book of Genesis doesn't actually care about fitting anyone's timeline, he ends up heading to his mother's hometown to find himself a wife. He gets there and he sees Rachel, who fits the criteria that his parents set for him, and he catches mad feelings. He kisses her right then in front of all of these shepherds who were gathered around the local well, and then he starts crying, which, awkward. And Jacob ends up living with Rachel's dad, Laban, for a while, and he negotiates a marriage with Laban, her father. And Jacob needed work, so he agrees to work for Laban for 7 years. And his pay, at the end of those 7 years, would be to marry Rachel, who is the younger of Laban's two daughters. Rachel, whose name sounds like the Hebrew word for lamb, is described as graceful, beautiful. Leah, on the other hand, has a name that means wild cow, and she's described as having weary eyes. According to Jewish commentator Rashi, that's because she spent so much time crying, because she was destined to marry Esau and she didn't want to marry him. So God took pity on her, and well, we'll get there. So Laban agrees, probably because somebody working 7 years for your daughter is a pretty good deal. And after 7 years, it's time for Jacob to get married. They have an epic feast. Jacob must have gotten quite drunk, not explicit in the story, but it's the only thing that makes sense. And when he wakes up the next morning, he finds out that he married Leah and not Rachel, who he worked for 7 years for. The cheat has been cheated, and now he is real mad about it. So Laban gives him a kind of flimsy reason for the deception, but also negotiates another 7 years of work so that Jacob can marry Rachel as well as Leah, who he already had married thinking it was Rachel. I don't really have much to say about this reading, except that it's really kind of messed up. The writers of Genesis don't tell us anything about how Leah and Rachel felt about Laban's deception, except that Leah later knows that she is the unwanted wife, even though it didn't stop Jacob from having, I think, 7 kids with her. So that also kind of makes Jacob look like a real winner. But we have Leah, who is desperate for her husband to love her, and Rachel, who doesn't have kids until much later, constantly fighting with each other about their mutual state. It seems like an incredibly unhappy family. But at the same time, especially for the ancient Near East, that's reality. Christians often try to soften the Bible to make it seem like everything is great all the time and perfect and wonderful, but stories like Rachel's and Leah's are unpleasant. They're part of the scriptures because that's how life can be. So we read these stories, and when we center the folk on the margins, rather than just paying attention to the rich and powerful men who are painted by other rich and powerful men as the main characters, we can see life for what it is. And we can see the ways that God hears the cries of those marginalized people, even when the people who wrote the Bible might not have wanted us to see that. And we can see how God suffers with them and brings them through their suffering. So if you want to see more content like this, check out the links to my right, or click the logo below my face to subscribe so you'll know when my next video comes out. Thank you for watching, and take the time this week to love your neighbor as yourself, especially if you don't like them all that much.